Hi everyone, and welcome to the second part of Capablanca's chess fundamentals. The customary quote: "It is not our abilities that show what we truly are, it is our choices." From the wizard Albus Dumbledore. A brief review of the first part, which included an introduction on Capablanca and his book Chess Fundamentals. We started Chapter 1, First Principles, Ending, Middle Game and Openings, and discussed a few examples given by Capablanca regarding simple mates. So now, moving further into the book, Capablanca discusses another simple mate. He writes, Example 4. We now come to queen and king against king. As the queen combines the power of the rook and bishop, it is the easiest mate of all, and should always be accomplished in under 10 moves. Take the position on board. A good way to begin is to make the first move with the queen, trying to limit the black king's mobility as much as possible. Thus, Queen c6, King d4, and King d2. Already the black king has only one available square. King e5, King e3, King f5, Queen d6, and King g5. Should black play King g4, then Queen g6 check. So King g5, Queen e6, and King h4. If King h5, King f4, and mate next move. So King h4, Queen g6, King h3, King f3, King any move, Queen mates. For example, King h4, Queen g4 mate, or King h2 and Queen g2 mate. In this ending, as in the case of the rook, the black king must be forced to the edge of the board. Only the queen being so much more powerful than the rook, the process is far easier and shorter. These are the three elementary endings, and in all of these the principle is the same. In each case, the cooperation of the king is needed. In order to force a mate without the aid of the king, at least two rooks are required. Moving further, Capablanca discusses the next topic under the heading number 2, pawn promotion. He writes, the gain of a pawn is the smallest material advantage that can be obtained in a game, and it often is sufficient to win, even when the pawn is the only remaining unit apart from the king's. It is essential, speaking generally, that the king should be in front of his pawn with at least one intervening square. If the opposing king is directly in front of the pawn, then the game cannot be won. This can best be explained by the following examples. Example 5. The position on board is drawn, and the way to proceed is for black to keep the king always directly in front of the pawn. And when it cannot be done, as for instance in this position, because of the white king, then the black king must be kept in front of the white king. The play would proceed thus: e3, King e5, King d3, and King d5. This is a very important move. Any other move would lose, as will be shown later. As the black king cannot be kept close up to the pawn, it must be brought as far forward as possible and at the same time in front of the white king. e4 check, king e5, king e3, king e6, king f4 and king f6. Again the same case. As the white king comes up, the black king must be kept in front of it, since it cannot be brought up to the pawn. e5 check, king e6, king e4, king e7, king d5, king d7, e6 check, king e7, king e5, king e8, king d6 and king d8. If now white advances the pawn, the black king gets in front of it, and white must either give up the pawn or play king e6, and a stalemate results. If instead of advancing the pawn, white withdraws their king, black brings their king up to the pawn, and when forced to go back, they move the king in front of the pawn ready to come up again, or to move in front of the white king, as before should the latter advance. The whole mode of procedure is very important, and the student should become thoroughly conversant with its details, for it involves principles to be taken up later on. And because many a beginner has lost identical positions from lack of proper knowledge, at this stage of the book I cannot lay too much stress on its importance. Example 6. In the position on board, white wins, as the king is in front of his pawn and there is one intervening square. The method to follow is to advance the king as far as is compatible with the safety of the pawn, and never to advance the pawn until it is essential to its own safety. Thus, king e4 and king e6. Black does not allow the white king to advance. Therefore, white is now compelled to advance their pawn, so as to force black to move away. White is then able to advance their own king. e3, king f6, king d5, and king e7. If black had played king f5 here, then white would be forced to advance the pawn to e4, since they could not advance their king without leaving black the opportunity to play king e4, winning the pawn. Since black has not done so, it is better for white not to advance the pawn yet, since its own safety does not require it, but to try to bring the king still further forward. Thus, king e5, king d7, king f6, and king e8. Now the white pawn is too far back, and it may be brought up within protection of the king. e4 and king d7. Now it would not do to play king f7, because black would play king d6 and white would have to bring their king to protect the pawn. Therefore, after king d7, white must continue e5 and king e8. Had black moved anywhere else, for example king d8, White could have played king f7, followed by the advance of the pawn to e6, e7 and e8, all these squares being protected by the king. As black tries to prevent that with king e8, white must now force them to move away, at the same time always keeping the king in front of the pawn. Thus, king e6. e6 would make it a draw, as black would then play king f8, and we would have a position similar to the one explained in connection with the previous example number 5. So king e6, king f8 and king d7. Black king moves and white pawn advances to e8, becomes a queen, and it is all over. This ending is like the previous one, and for the same reasons should be thoroughly understood before proceeding any further. Moving further, Capablanca discusses the next topic under the heading number 3, pawn endings. He writes, I shall now give a couple of simple endings of 2 pawns against 1, or 3 against 2, that the reader may see how they can be won. Fewer explanations will be given, as it is up to the student to work things out for themselves. Furthermore, nobody can learn how to play well merely from the study of a book. It can only serve as a guide, and the rest must be done by the teacher if the student has one. If not, the student must realize by long and bitter experience of the many things explained in the book. Example 7. In the position on board, white cannot win by playing f6, because black plays not g takes on f6, because that would lose, but king g8, and if then f takes on g7, king takes on g7 and draws, as shown in a previous case. If f7 check here, then king f8, and white will never be able to queen their pawn without losing it. If king e7 here, then g takes on f6, king takes on f6, king f8 and draws. White, however, can win the original position by playing king d7, king g8, king e7, king h8, f6, g takes on f6. If instead king g8, f7 check, king g8, f8 queen mate. So g takes on f6, king f7, f5, g7 check, king h7, g8 queen, king h6 and queen g6 mate. Example 8. In the position on board, white can't win by f5. Black's best answer would be g6, draws. The student should work this out. Now, apparently this was a small oversight here by Capablanca. Since f5 does win for white in the given position, a sample line given by Stockfish is following after g6. F takes on g6, king e6, g5, king e7, king e5, king e8, king e6, king f8, king f6, king g8, g7, king h7, g8 queen, king takes on g8, king g6, king f8, and king h7, after which the g-pawn will queen. In this day and age, it is easy to check mistakes and errors given the strength of chess engines. Back in the day when this book was written, there were no chess engines, and of course, the element of human error does occur even among the strongest of chess players. Capablanca continues. White also cannot win by g5 because g6 draws. This because of the principle of the opposition, which governs this ending as well as all the pawn endings already given, and which will be explained more fully later on. White can win, however, by playing king e4 and king e6. If g6, king d4, king e6, king c5, king f6, king d6, king f7, g5, king g7, king e7, king g8, king f6, king h7, king f7, and white wins the pawn. So king e6, f5 check, king f6, king f4, and g6. If this pawn is kept back by black, we arrive at the ending shown in the previous example, number 7. g5 check, king f7, f6, king e6, king e4, king f7, king e5, and king f8. White cannot force their f-pawn into a queen. Find out why. But by giving their pawn up, white can win the other black pawn and the game. Thus, f7. King takes on f7, king d6, king f8, king e6, king g7, king e7, king g8, king f6, king h7, king f7, king h8, king takes on g6, and king g8. There is still some resistance in black's position. In fact, the only way to win is the one given here, as will easily be seen by experiment. King h6. If king f6, king h7, and in order to win, white must get back to the actual position. As against g6, king h8 draws. So king h6, king h8, g6, king g8, g7, king f7, king h7, and white queens the pawn and wins. This ending, apparently so simple, should show the student the enormous difficulties to be surmounted, even when there are hardly any pieces left, when playing against an adversary who knows how to use the resources at their disposal. And it should show the student also the necessity of paying strict attention to these elementary things which form the basis of true mastership in chess. Example 9. In this ending, white can win by advancing any of the 3 pawns on the first move. But it is convenient to follow the general rule, whenever there is no good reason against it, of advancing the pawn that has no pawn opposing it. Thus, we begin by f5 and king e7. If instead g6, then f6, and we have a similar ending to one of those shown previously. If h6, then g5. So king e7, king e5, king f7, g5, and king e7. If instead g6, then f6. If h6, g6 check, and in either case we have a similar ending to one of those already shown. So king e7, h5, and by following it up with g6, we have the same ending previously shown. Should black play g6, then h takes on g6, h takes on g6, and f6 check with the same result. Having now seen the cases when the pawns are all on one side of the board, we shall now examine a case when there are pawns on both sides of the board. Example 10. In these cases, the general rule is to act immediately on the side where you have superior forces. Thus, we have g4. It is generally advisable to advance the pawn that is free from opposition. a5. Black makes an advance on the other side, and now white considers whether or not they should stop the advance. In this case, either way wins, but generally the advance should be stopped when the opposing king is far away. a4, king f6, h4, and king e6. If king g6, then simple counting will show that white goes to the other side with their king, wins the pawn at a5, and then queens their single pawn long before black can do the same. So king e6, g5, king f7, king f5, king g7, h5, king f7. If instead h6, then g6, and then the two pawns defend themselves, and white can go to the other side with their king to win the other pawn. So king f7 and king e5. Now it is time to go to the other side with the king, win the black pawn, and queen the single pawn. This is typical of all such endings and should be worked out by the student in this case and in similar cases which they can put up. Alright, we conclude this part of Capablanca's chess fundamentals here, and we shall continue onwards from the next one. Here is a look at the recent channel support from my Twitch stream. Several new supporters: Farmenides, Ollie B1, Go now to qoija, BadCoffeeCup, elkeeno, Neuer Viking, Jackie the Swede, John V77, gztgztgzt, and Rekle. Neuer Viking and Jackie the Swede are both fellow chess streamers. I will post a link to their respective Twitch channels in the video description. Do check them out. Thank you for the kind support, everyone. Much appreciated. Alright, till next time, take care.